Wir setzen fort und wir machen das hier auf dem Panel so. Wir beginnen auf Deutsch, wechseln dann aber später ins Englische und bleiben dann auch bei Englisch. Fangen jetzt aber erstmal auf Deutsch diese Diskussion an. Dieses Panel heißt, tun wir genug für einen Sieg der Ukraine? Und ich möchte die Frage am Anfang direkt beantworten, damit wir damit durch sind. Nein, das tun wir nicht. Jetzt ist die Frage, was müssen wir tun? Und darüber würde ich gerne mit den 4 Panelisten reden, damit diese offensichtliche Sache können wir uns, glaube ich, hier sparen, sondern wir reden über das, was zu tun ist. Und ich finde es gut, dass die Veranstalter dieses Panel mit Sieg der Ukraine betitelt haben. Ich glaube, das gibt es auch nur in der deutschen Bundesliga. Sorry für den Fußballvergleich, dass man glaubt, dass Spiele unentschieden ausgehen können. Das gibt es übrigens in anderen Sportligen nicht. Da muss immer jemand gewinnen. Und als jemand, der selbst auch einen militärischen Hintergrund hat, bin ich der festen Überzeugung, es geht bei einem Krieg darum, dass ein Ergebnis erzielt wird. Und dieses Ergebnis, das ist in dem vorherigen Panel schon klar geworden, dieses Ergebnis muss sein, Russland zu schlagen. Darum geht es. Und das ist auch bewusst die richtige Formulierung. Deswegen bin ich dankbar für Sieg der Ukraine, weil es nicht darum geht, Russland zu vertreiben. Man muss Russland schlagen, damit man vor den imperialen Absichten Russlands abgesichert ist. Die Frage ist, was können wir tun, um der Ukraine dabei zu helfen, genau das zu machen? Wir tun nicht genug und wir sind in einer Logik gefangen, zumindest hier von Berlin ausgehend, die sich hinter Formulierungen versteckt, wie wir helfen der Ukraine, solange das notwendig ist und die Ukraine darf nicht verlieren. Ich bin mir sicher, dass es hier im Raum große Einigkeit darüber gibt, aber in der deutschen Debatte muss, glaube ich, noch mehr dafür getan werden, um das zu verändern. Die Ukraine muss sich da militärisch durchsetzen können und wir müssen das so schnell wie möglich mit unserer Unterstützung bewerkstelligen. Das andere Rezept funktioniert nicht. So viel kann man, glaube ich, an dieser Stelle sagen. Ich will diese Fragen diskutieren mit 4 Diskutanten, die hier sind. Und als jemand mit einem militärischen Hintergrund weiß ich auch, dass man im Krieg nicht nur den Feind schlagen muss, sondern man kämpft auch immer gegen die Uhr. Das ist übrigens ein Grund, warum wir so schnell wie möglich der Ukraine helfen müssen und nicht so langsam sein dürfen. Zeit ist ein Faktor. Wir sehen das spätestens dadurch, dass wir Russland die Zeit gegeben haben, Verteidigungsstellungen aufzubauen, wie das alles schwieriger gemacht hat. Ich will im Sinne der Zeit jetzt keine lange Vorstellungsrunde machen. Sie sehen im Programm, wer hier ist. Ich fange direkt an, Christian Mölling etwas zu fragen und dann kommen wir hier in die Debatte und ich beziehe dann alle weitere mit ein. Christian, du hast dich sehr intensiv mit der Frage der industriellen Unterstützung auseinandergesetzt und du hast schon sehr früh einen Aufsatz darüber geschrieben, also im Grunde nach einigen Wochen Krieg, dass wir die industrielle Basis schaffen müssen für die Unterstützung der Ukraine und auch für unsere eigene Unterstützung. Wie weit sind wir da gekommen und was sind jetzt die Schritte, die aus deiner Sicht notwendig sind, um die industrielle Grundlage dafür zu schaffen, damit ein Sieg der Ukraine ermöglicht wird?
Hören mich alle wunderbar. Auf Deutsch jetzt erstmal weiter, ne? Okay. Ich spule mal gerade zurück auf sozusagen die richtigen Teil der Platte. Ich glaube, es macht immer noch Sinn, 2 Phasen zu unterteilen. Und das tut ja die Bundesregierung zum jetzigen Zeitpunkt auch nicht. Nämlich das eine ist sozusagen, ich beschreibe das jetzt halt immer mit dem High-Intensity-War, den wir jetzt haben. Und dann wird es eine Übergangsphase geben, wo wir die Ukraine aufrüsten müssen, um sich entweder innerhalb der NATO oder außerhalb der NATO gegen Russland zu verteidigen. Völlig egal, welche institutionellen Regeln, das muss geschehen. Dafür haben wir auch eine Zeitachse. Diese Zeitachse ist, je nachdem, welche Voraussagen man nimmt, ich nehme mal jetzt die 2 mittleren, entweder 6 Jahre oder 10 Jahre nach Ende des High-Intensity-Warfare. Ich nehme mal jetzt noch eine weitere Zahl mit rein. Mein Eindruck ist, dass die jetzige Bundesregierung davon ausgeht, dass wir ab Anfang nächsten Jahres im Endgame sind. Das heißt also, irgendwann nächstes Jahr zwangsläufig irgendwas von Frieden geschlossen werden muss. Ich würde das Wort Frieden niemals in den Mund nehmen, aber das ist etwas, was damit reinkommt. So, dann hätten wir 6 bis 10 Jahre Zeit, eine entsprechende industrielle Basis aufzubauen. Ich stelle Ihnen jetzt mal was dagegen. Ein klassisches Rüstungsprojekt in Deutschland dauert 12 bis 15 Jahre. So, das können Sie abstreichen, die können wir schon nicht mehr machen. Ein Beschaffungsvorgang dauert ungefähr 1 Jahr. Wir kommen in eine Situation hinein, wo wir mit Blick auf die industrielle Basis uns entscheiden müssen, ob wir militärisch gesehen more of the same machen und ob das reicht mit Blick auf Russland und die Abschreckung, die wir aufbauen wollen für die Ukraine und für uns. Oder ob wir uns sehr komplexe Rüstungsprojekte in dieser Phase der nächsten 6 bis 10 Jahre überhaupt noch leisten können. Also das, wenn du mich so fragst, was da passiert ist, die beste Strategie ist eine, die sagt, okay, wir sind in 6 Jahren fertig und das heißt, wir rüsten das, was wir jetzt haben, um und rüsten in einer zweiten Phase auf. Das bedeutet, dass die ganzen fancy Projekte, die wir jetzt zurzeit machen, dass wir die canceln können, wenn du mich ganz ehrlich fragst. Dann ist das durch. Dann müssen wir das Geld umschichten. Das tut mir jetzt total leid für alle diejenigen, die auf FCAS und also Future Combat Air System, also zukünftiges Flugzeug und Panzer gesetzt haben. Dann werden wir, ich mache das mal ganz platt, einen Leopard 2 Plus haben müssen und uns damit auch zufrieden geben müssen, dass alle ab sofort auf diesen Zeitlinien arbeiten und mit einer Minimalausstattung zurande kommen. Das ist nicht das, was wir uns langfristig vorgestellt haben. Das hat auch negative Seiten für die Industrie mit Wettbewerbsfähigkeit und so weiter und so fort. Aber wenn das primäre Ziel Verteidigungsfähigkeit oder Kampffähigkeit Europas ist, dann ist es als erstes die Order an die Industrie umzustellen und zu sagen, wir müssen jetzt erstmal vor allen Dingen Quantität machen. Es ist nicht so sehr die Qualität, weil die Qualität schaffen wir in dieser Zeit tatsächlich überhaupt nicht mehr. Das erstmal als erste kurze Antwort.
Ich stelle direkt eine Folgefrage, bevor wir weitergehen. Wenn wir das Thema Sieg der Ukraine nochmal angucken und du hast Quantität angesprochen, dann springt ins Auge, dass Luftverteidigungssysteme, Munition für Luftverteidigungssysteme, 155 mm Artilleriemunition, Mörsermunition in großen Quantitäten ganz entscheidende Faktoren sind, wo ja auch auf der anderen Seite jemand sieht, wie viel wir produzieren und weiß, wie viel er selbst produzieren kann und im Moment zumindest den Eindruck zu haben scheint, er schafft mehr als wir und hat deswegen eine Chance, sich militärisch durchzusetzen. Was braucht es, damit wir in diesen elementaren Kategorien so viel produzieren können, dass wir der Ukraine die Dinge liefern?
Ja.
Möglicherweise auch, wenn die USA gleichzeitig Israel unterstützen müssen oder aus anderen Gründen etwas zurücktreten. Wie kann man das hinbekommen in Deutschland?
Ja, also vor die Hauptantwort auf deine Frage eine Vorbemerkung. Ich bin zurzeit etwas skeptisch bei dem Spin, dass wir in einen Verteilungskonkurrenzkampf mit Blick auf militärische Güter, also Munition etc., zwischen der Ukraine und Israels reinlaufen. Das, was ich bislang gesehen habe, sind komplett andere Systeme, die haben nichts miteinander zu tun. Es gibt die Konkurrenz nicht. Man kann die herbeireden. Ich versuche das zurzeit auszutreten, wo immer es geht. Bitte helfen Sie mir dabei. Solange es keine konkreten Anlässe dazu gibt. Es gibt sicherlich bei der politischen Ebene die Frage der politischen Aufmerksamkeit. Okay, aber mit Blick auf das, was militärische Produkte angeht, ist aus meiner Sicht zurzeit das Problem nicht gegeben. Jetzt zu deiner Hauptfrage zurück, das, was sozusagen das alltägliche Verbrauchsmaterial ist, aber lebenswichtig ist, alle Formen von Munition. Westliche Produzenten produzieren genug Munition, um die Ukraine und den Westen damit ausreichend zu versorgen. Das heißt also, selbst wenn wir es richtig machen würden, würden wir wahrscheinlich es noch nicht mal haben, dass wir die Diskussion, geht die deutsche Munition in die Ukraine oder bleibt sie bei der Bundeswehr haben. Was bedeutet das? Ich muss an die westlichen Hersteller herantreten und sagen, bitte nutzt alle eure Produktionskapazitäten, die eben nicht nur in Europa sind, sondern weltweit sind, und stellt sie bitte so um und bittet diejenigen, denen ihr jetzt schon Munition versprochen habt, ob sie von ihren Verträgen für eine gewisse Zeit zurückstehen können. Die Leute, mit denen ich gesprochen habe in der Industrie, sind dafür offen. Das heißt, dass sie sicherlich nochmal Geld in die Hand nehmen müssen, ganz klar. Aus meiner Sicht rechnet sich das, aber der Markt gibt es mit Blick auf die Produktionskapazität derzeit her. Was er nicht hergibt, ist zumindest nach deutschen Standards eine neue Produktionsreihe irgendwo aufzubauen, weil das dauert 2 bis 3 Jahre. Ne? Also wir zertifizieren immer ordentlich und so weiter und so fort. Das ist auch gar nicht verkehrt. Aber die gute Nachricht ist, es ist genug Kapazität da. Man muss sie bloß aktivieren und nutzen wollen. Das ist, glaube ich, der wesentliche Punkt. Und nicht jeder muss darauf bitte bestehen, auf dem Foto mit drauf zu sein. Die Aktivitäten in der Europäischen Union haben gut angefangen. Die beste Lösung wäre gewesen, zu sagen, pass auf, liebe Ukraine, hier ist ein Topf Geld. Ihr bestellt irgendwo und wir bezahlen das. Und es ist uns völlig egal. Anstatt dass jeder, der in einer Brüsseler Institution sitzt, noch mit auf das Foto unbedingt draufkommen müsste. Das ist aus meiner Sicht eine pragmatische Lösung und ich glaube auch eine, die die Amerikaner mit unterstützen würden. Die Idee, wie gesagt, jetzt, also eine Sache will ich noch austreten. Die abstrakte Appell, die Industrie muss jetzt hochfahren. Das macht die Industrie aus 2 Gründen nicht. Weil sie das Geld zurzeit nicht sieht und weil sie eigentlich, das Geld hat was mit Risiko zu tun und Refinanzierung zu tun, da hängt ein ganzer finanzieller Mechanismus hinter, der für jede Industrie normal ist. Das andere ist, dass auch die Industrien noch in einem Friedensmodus arbeiten. Ein deutscher Hersteller eines Kampfflugzeuges sagt, okay, jetzt habe ich für die nächsten 10 Jahre meine Produktionslinie ausgelegt und die ist voll und danach kommt dann in den nächsten 10 Jahren kommt das und das. Das heißt, sie sind in ihrer Berechnung auch noch in den Friedenszeiten drin. Und das ist natürlich etwas, wo man wirklich nur sozusagen Incentives geben kann und man kann nicht auf den Knopf drücken und sagen, so jetzt stellt ihr mal um. In Deutschland schon gar nicht und selbst da, wo die Industrie zu einem gewissen Teil unter staatlicher Kontrolle ist, wird auch das nicht möglich sein.
Letzte Frage an dich, Christian, zu dem Komplex. Die Kapazitäten nutzen. Wie macht man das? Durch Geld, durch Abnahmegarantien, dass man sagt, okay, alles, was ihr produziert, produziert mehr, wir nehmen das auf jeden Fall, ihr werdet das auf jeden Fall los. Wie kriegt man das hin?
Das ist eine schwierige Ad-Hoc. Ich versuche jetzt mal ad hoc zu antworten. Du kannst selbst in solchen dramatischen Situationen Marktelemente kreieren, denn das ist ja sozusagen die Sorge des deutschen Steuerzahlers, männlich, weiblich, divers, zumindest unterstellt. Wir hätten Angst davor, dass uns das Geld sozusagen aus der Tasche gezogen werden würde. Du kannst es, glaube ich, vielleicht teilt man es in Drittel und sagt, 1/3 dafür geben wir Abnahmegarantien. Ansonsten kann sich die Ukraine mit einem weiteren Drittel an Geld auf dem Weltmarkt das Zeug besorgen. Damit habe ich einen Teil zumindest von Wettbewerb da wieder mit drin. Der wird nicht ausufernd sein, weil natürlich auch die Hersteller wissen, wie teuer ihre Munition jetzt gerade auf dem Markt verkauft werden kann. Aber am Ende des Tages ist es so, wir müssen uns im Klaren sein, na klar, das wird mehr Geld kosten. Wahrscheinlich ist es sinnvoll, doch nochmal eine Gegenrechnung aufzumachen und zu sagen, wie billig uns solche Munition zum Zeit auf dem Weltmarkt kommt im Vergleich dazu, was wir bezahlen müssen, wenn die Ukraine, so wie du es gesagt hast, eben nicht gewinnt. Das ist ja der viel höhere Kostenfaktor. Und da springe ich jetzt mal auf eine andere Ebene. Wir haben zurzeit im Diskurs in Berlin den erneuten Versuch, oder war vielleicht immer da und kommt jetzt wieder hoch, zu sagen, ja, die Sicherheit der Ukraine ist das eine und die von Europa ist das andere. Das ist eine ganz schlechte Entwicklung, die wir da zurzeit haben. Dass man eigentlich versucht, auch dieses Land für Frieden-Argument, das hängt sich da ja sozusagen mit dran. Das kommt gerade alles wieder. Also der Snapshot ist, wir sind da auf einer ganz slippery slope gerade. Das heißt nicht, dass das gegessen ist, aber wenn man das stoppen will, dann geht das Zeitfenster tatsächlich zu für die politischen Argumente, die die Bundesregierung soweit positiv oder negativ encouragen, zu sagen, okay, wir machen doch noch mal eine Runde weiter. Dass diese Bundesregierung das nicht liebt oder bestimmte Teile, ist, glaube ich, jedem klar.
Danke dir, Christian. Ich fand das sehr wichtig, dass wir mit diesen sehr spezifisch deutschen Fragen einsteigen, weil, glaube ich, viel dranhängt, dass die Industriekapazitäten jetzt ausgeschöpft werden. Das sieht man auch. Gerade, also ich war vor ein paar Wochen zuletzt an der Front im Süden, wo die Ukraine zumindest jetzt in einigen Teilen das erste Mal Parität und Übergewicht bei der Artillerie hat. Das wird sie nur aufrechterhalten können, wenn ständig die Munition nachgeliefert wird. Und da sind diese Fragen eben sehr, sehr wichtig. Sorry to everybody else that we did this specific German issue in the beginning, but I think it's important to the discussion where we are now. I will now switch to English and continue with you, Justyna. Justyna Gotkowska from the Center for Eastern Studies in Poland, long-time observer of German policy making, not only vis-à-vis Ukraine, but in general. Also commentator, sometimes even sharp commentator of what Germany is doing or not doing. Justyna, when you think about victory of Ukraine, I have two questions. From your point of view, what is victory of Ukraine? And secondly, what are the main resources that are needed for Ukraine to achieve this victory, how you define it?
Thank you for this question. Thank you for the invitation for this conference. It's always interesting to come to Berlin and to see what discussion on Ukraine you have here. I think that it's pretty clear what Ukrainian victory is from the Polish perspective, and I think that you widely share this idea here in this room. And I think that the clear idea of Ukrainian victories, Ukraine to regain all its territorial losses, including Crimea and Donbas, in order to put limits to Russian expansion and neo-imperialism. I would say also that Ukrainian victory, although I don't like to use this term because I think it describes or misinterprets the situation we are in. This refers to what Christian was saying, that Ukrainian or the war in Ukraine is not crucial for European security. And it's a regional war where Ukraine should win. And it's not connected directly to us. I think we should ask how can we secure in long-term European security? How can we guarantee peace in Europe in the long term? And I think it's not only Ukrainian regaining its territorial integrity, but also Ukraine being a member of the EU and NATO. Because then only this, from the Polish perspective, from the Eastern European perspective, from the perspective of the Eastern flank, would set clear limits for Russia and for Russian expansionism, and would secure us for a long time to go, would introduce changes in Russia and how Russians think about themselves and their place in Europe and in the world. So this is quite clear. Whether this is widely shared, I have doubts, because as I analyze the situation, we have different readings of where we are in Europe, and Christian mentioned that. The one camp, and I think Eastern flank, parts of German experts, parts of German politicians understand that we are facing a shift in global affairs, that Russia wants to undermine European security, wants to undermine the sovereignty of Central Eastern Europe, wants to undermine NATO, EU, push out the US from Europe. Hence, the only way to prevent that is what I have described. But I think the other reading is, and I think this reading governs the Western strategy, where the goal is not necessarily Ukrainian victory, I have the impression, but the goal is managing the situation and managing this war with Russia in a way that we are not heading toward nuclear escalation of this war, in a sense that this war has a rather regional dimension, is not directly connected to European security. We don't, or the reasoning behind this reading is that Russia is too weak to go against NATO allies. Which we on the eastern flank don't think so, and we prepare for worst case scenarios, and hence a kind of managing the war in Ukraine, a kind of heading towards a frozen conflict when Russia finally understands in such a situation that it made a mistake and will live in the future with such a managed situation. That I think this is the reading and the analysis here in the Chancellery that will cause problems for us in the future. And I think we are entering in a situation, in a difficult situation right now, where this camp that governs the Western strategy has overestimated itself, in my opinion, because has overestimated the possibility of the West to maintain military help and other help support for Ukraine on the level we have had for the year and a half. We see the problems in the United States with the next financial package for Ukraine to be introduced in the Congress. We see the conflict in the Middle East distracting US focus from Ukraine. Europe is not prepared to step up in case the US help or the US support will dry out. Western societies are wary of the war. Russia sees this as a proof that it was right, and its strategy to wait out the West is paying off. So I think we are sort of past the peak of Western support for Ukraine. We have not used the first year and a half to fully use the possibilities to weaken military Russia to a much greater extent. And now we are, in my opinion, we will be in a much weaker position in the year to come with growing problems. I hope the Ukrainians can surprise us with their willingness to go and resolve and to win. But I have the impression that either we will have frozen lines, or even Russia might gain the upper hand. And in this moment, we will be faced with a situation that we will need a kind of a Zeitenwende 2.0.
Let's get the first Zeitenwende right first, and then do a second one. I have a follow-up. You described, I think, very accurately the different camps when it comes to the aim, whether to manage the conflict or helping Ukraine to win. And do you think in the next phase there will be a chance to clarify this, to come to a more unified positions among the partners supporting Ukraine, or do you think it's better to continue to avoid clarification?
I hope, this is my question that I'm asking myself and that I'm asking you here in Germany and in Berlin. How can we change the way people think about the current security situation in Europe and globally? And I don't have an answer. And I think the Polish answer to this question is setting on building up national military capabilities, national deterrence, defense and deterrence, in stronger cooperation with the region, because if the situation in Ukraine worsens, Russia will go further and we will be the target. I think this is a clear understanding of the situation in Poland, and I think the clearest answer that a Pole or a person from the eastern flank can give: do what you can do yourself. Meaning prepare for the worst case scenarios and prepare and invest in your own defense capabilities. That would be my answer.
And it's a pragmatic and a little bit sad answer at the same time, right? Because it means we cannot rely on each other, so it's better everybody takes care to rely on oneself.
I think countries on the front line need to think in worst case scenarios, which does not mean that we should not cooperate and try to convince our allies and partners that about the gravity of the situation, about the need to differently read the situation, about the need to help Ukraine to the extent possible, and the need to invest in our own defense capabilities. But being from a frontline state in a situation or in a global and European security situation as we face it now, global shifts, more instability, global powers willing to undermine regional orders, not only in Europe, but in the Middle East, in the Pacific, we need to prepare for scenarios where there will be a lot of unknown. So I think, of course, the best option would be to cooperate with the US, to cooperate with Germany, to cooperate within NATO, within the EU. But we see how the discussions in Germany are shaped. And we need to take that into consideration and think about worst case scenarios. And whatever the case, I think that the eastern flank needs to prepare themselves for a much more unstable security environment and neighborhood.
I think it is, for a discussion in Berlin, very important what you just said, because it means for us that we have a lot of work to do in Berlin to make our partners in NATO and EU, in Central Europe, trust in us that we would be there if the worst case comes. And it seems at the moment they are skeptical enough to take provisions for that. But let's maybe return to that later. I want to turn to this side and bring Maryna Vorotnyuk into the debate, who is currently with Rosie in London. And we are talking about Ukrainian victory here. And I wanted to ask a twofold question to you as well. The first part being, Ukrainians are very optimistic about victory. And sometimes I have the feeling that the Ukrainians have the mental stance to say we have no other option, we have to be victorious in this. What is the path you see to Ukrainian victory? And the second part, to complicate this a little bit more, I had a conversation with a very high-ranking Ukrainian official quite recently who told me that even if Ukraine would be able to advance back to the borders of 1991, that would not be the end of the war, because there would still be attempts from Russia for incursions, there would still be exchange of missiles. So what is needed to turn Ukrainian victory into peace?
Thanks a lot, Nico, and thanks to the Center for Liberal Modernity for having us here today. Well, difficult questions. Victory of Ukraine, how I see it, the Ukrainian optics, and you said optimistic about victory. Ukrainians being optimistic about victory. Well, I wouldn't use the term optimistic, but it's rather, you know, this kind of resigned to win because there is no other choice. You understand that this is an existential war for Ukrainians. So this is an eliminatory fight. That means that if they don't resist, so there is no other option than resist, you know. So that means, you know, that again, of course, there is a sort of, let's say, hope or belief that all the resources which are, you know, which are in possession of Ukrainian armed forces would be used. And you said the path to the victory, of course, I mean, here the Western military assistance is a crucial element, we understand. It has been remarkable and it gave Ukrainians a fighting chance. So to start with, this is very important to acknowledge. And then, you know, the title of this panel is, are we doing enough? And this already directs us to a further problem that we need also to acknowledge, is that at the same time, we have seen significant delays in provision of Western military assistance, which is, you know, now when we are taking stock of Ukrainian counteroffensive and admitting that it's not, you know, going at the pace, you know, as desired or expected, we need to factor in, you know, what this delay. You know, of course, there are one of the part of the explanation is that Russian forces learn and adapt, but the delays in the provision of Western military assistance is a crucial explanation here why we don't see the counteroffensive as successful as we wanted to see. So when, and Ukrainian officials warned about this for quite long, that this delay can have negative impact, Commander-in-Chief Zaluzhny was talking that no Western army would be fighting without air superiority, and you see Ukrainian army doing exactly this at the same time now as we speak. Or he famously said that this is not counterinsurgency, this is Kursk, So Ukrainians fight in Kursk, and for this type of warfare, they don't have the capabilities needed to fight this type of warfare at the moment. So yes, there has been a profound shift. We have to acknowledge this. Even looking at 2014, when there was no readiness at all to supply lethal weapons to Ukrainians for the fear of escalation, and then small shift with javelins, and later with the Turkish Bayraktars, and in 2021 with the other nations joining in at the backdrop of the Russian military backup. But still 20 months into the war, we found Ukraine is supplied with advanced weaponry. But as I said, again, it took time, and of course it took preventable losses on Ukrainian side. Ukrainian victory, you asked the question, and this is something that we discussed at the previous panels as well. What is the end game? If you ask Ukrainians, Ukrainian optics is very clear. They know what the end game is, which is expelling Russian troops from the entirety of the Ukrainian territory, is that making Russia pay reparations, the international tribunal, so delivering strategic defeat to Russia in the sense of strategic defeat. And then I think this is the problem, that among Ukrainian allies, do we really see a clear, unified vision what Russia's defeat is and what Ukraine's victory is? So there is a formula: we will support Ukraine as long as it takes, which is a it's reassuring commitment, but sometimes I have a sense that it camouflages the absence of the strategy, that we don't know actually what is our end game. How do we see Russian defeat? So I'm sometimes asked, okay, but what do you exactly want Russia to look after you win? So, and I think this is important, not to be afraid actually to tackle this question, and probably important to raise here. Again, about the ambiguity of the language when we use. It's probably natural now, when there are discussions about providing security guarantees to Ukraine, that we all use the terms assurances, pledges, arrangements, guarantees interchangeably. We are still, in the moment when the work is in progress, actually. Ukraine is in the process of discussing this with its allies. But I'm afraid that this ambiguity of the language, what exactly Ukrainian allies are ready to provide to Ukraine. This is decided, of course, on bilateral but also multilateral basis. So it remains to be hoped that in the end of the day, whatever term we use, that we will come up with the ironclad commitments, multi-year commitments and policy to support Ukraine to defend itself. And probably just one more point I want to add here, the ceasefire. You might know again what Ukrainians think about the term ceasefire. It's perceived very controversially in Ukraine by Ukrainians because very often it's been equaled with ceasefire on Russian terms, right? And many would say that, to push Ukrainians, and I agree, to ceasefire now at this moment would be dangerous. It's a significant, lapse of judgment to think that Russia at the moment would be willing. We don't see, Russia really willing to negotiate. It would use, as every other revisionist power, it would use this, time only to regroup and relaunch it. It's offensive. So the very last point, I think, because it has been raised today on numerous occasions, looking in the future, the fatigue, the distractions, lots of political processes that are not very favorable, in the for Ukraine. So I mean, we say we support Ukraine as long as it takes, and I think this is good, but it should be complemented with the, with the statement that we support Ukraine so that its victory won't take long. We need to not to resign, to the fact that this is a war of attrition. This is another protracted conflict, okay, but of higher intensity, not low, high or middle intensity for a decade to come. Some kind, accepting that we cannot make difference. We in the West, we can make difference. And when we see now the situation, I'm working on the Black Sea, when we see the situation, the dynamic situation in the Black Sea, and how Ukrainians showed their ingenuity and how they, put the Western supplied weapons to a very good use in the Black Sea, striking the Black Sea headquarters in the Crimea with the British missile, and then it did not lead to the escalation that Russians were threatening with, there was no retaliation. What we saw actually is that, to the contrary, we saw, Russians retreating, Russians redeploying its navy back to Novorossiysk, Ukrainians managing, to constrain Russian ability to operate freely in the Black Sea, very skillfully. And now the Ukrainians organizing the, this temporary grain corridor to export the grain without Russian, saying that, okay, confirmation. So we see that it is possible, and Ukraine should be enabled to be able to continue to do that. So last sentence, yes, I agree with the colleague who said that it's very important not to, because of course Russia is inventive, it's able to outlast and wear everybody down. So we need not to let this scenario happen. Thank you.
Maryna, let me also ask a follow-up to you, maybe a difficult one. If you look into Ukrainian society these days, where families are scattered over Europe, where life for many is full of hardships, where Ukrainians see on Facebook and other social network all of the time how their friends or people they know have fallen on the front lines or are injured, where you meet friends, old friends that present their new mechanical hand to you, or others who lost legs and arms. What is the discussion within Ukrainian society about the price to pay for Ukrainian victory?
Well, of course, there is an awareness and a sober calculation that the price is extremely, big to pay. And everybody, according to the latest polls, everybody has somebody who had died at the front line, so this means that this war touched everybody, as you said, in Ukraine. But I think at the same time, there is understanding that the price, if Ukraine is defeated, will be much larger to pay for the nation and for everybody individually. So anyways, so again, this resistance is an absolute must in this popular perception. So there are no alternatives. That's why I think there is lots of clarity in Ukraine about this. The clarity, as I said, which is not necessarily present abroad. And that's why I think this needs to be factored in when the international, when Ukraine's allies talk about the future, about the contours of possible settlement. I think sometimes it's done without a proper assessment of what is the mood in the country. That even if for some reason the weapons supplies stop, or the situation in the US or in any other countries changes in future, does that mean that Ukrainians will be more willing, to give up, or they change their. So I'm not expecting this to happen. So that means that we will just witness the tragedy of Ukraine collapsing, you know. And really, do we want this? And just, you know, I think in the previous session we discussed how many Western decision makers are paralyzed by the fear what will happen if Russia collapses. You know, that, you know, this fear of escalation. And I would argue there is, you know, a strategic, you know, there is a tradition of thinking about all kind of perils that can come from this. But so nobody is used to thinking what other nations, Baltic nations, if Ukraine collapses, what this will lead to. And I think this needs to be corrected, you know, remedied. We need to think what will happen if Ukraine collapses. And then, I mean, I myself probably, I mean, when we talk about the future of Western assistance, I think still there is an understanding and, you know, of the scale and dramatism that this war poses for the security in Europe. So I very much hope that there will be no reconsideration, that Ukraine is an absolute priority here. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Maryna, for pointing that out. I think it's important to underline this determination and also to explain this determination, especially in Germany, which is a country where we had at least parts of the society coming from a tradition of being better read than dead. So this a fight for self-determination and freedom is something, I think, unfortunately, that needs to be explained to Germans. Alex, thank you for your patience. I will bring you in now. You're the director of the Informed American Leadership Program at the VetVoice Foundation, but you are also former lieutenant colonel. And let me ask you a question from a military angle when it comes to Ukrainian victory. As a lieutenant colonel, you would be battalion commander, attacking against fortified positions in a flat field with a visibility of 10 miles without air superiority. What do you think? How can victory be achieved, and what is your judgment of what Ukrainians are achieving at the moment at the counteroffensive?
First, thanks for having me on this panel and inviting me here. I'm a new face. I've not been to Berlin for conferences, so first one. My background is decades of defense, but I was also in the diplomatic service and then finished up at the National Security Council. So my commentary on the tactical is going to be relatively light, but on the geopolitical as a strategist is, I think, where I'd like to contribute to this conversation. And based on the commentary from Justyna and Maryna, they made some sobering, very important points. So I'll try to build on those. We wouldn't fight like this. The U.S. fights with overwhelming superiority. You'll hear this from any general. We do not get into fair fights. We have overwhelming mass in terms of fires, personnel at the point that we choose to to fight in the first place, but where we conduct offensives, we have overwhelming capabilities in air power, in our ability to reduce our adversaries significantly. You could see that in how we conducted Desert Storm and Operation Iraqi Freedom. We basically mainly destroyed the Iraqi forces before we even started the maneuver phase. So that's we don't get engaged in fair fights. So I think we certainly, as the West, as a collective, haven't resourced Ukraine to have this overwhelming superiority at every phase. Things are approaching parity now in the South. But at every phase previously, the Russians had overwhelming fires. mass of fires that they could bring to bear, and somehow the Ukrainians beat the odds. You don't expect the attacking force to take less casualties than the defending force. Usually, you need overwhelming numbers in order to attack fortified positions. If we're talking about lightly defended, it's 3-1. If they're heavily defended, 5 or even 7-1. But the Ukrainians are still making gains absent air power. So we tended to underestimate the Ukrainians' ingenuity, their will to fight and win, and probably also overestimated the Russians' ability in terms of their raw capability, but also their morale and their willingness to die on the battlefield for they don't know what exactly. This is what is the outcome of this war? Is this panel? I think it's really too close to call. I think the margins are really too thin. There's only really one way that Ukraine could win, and many ways that it could lose. The one way that it wins is it has the overwhelming resources from the West to be able to achieve the tactical gains on the front lines. It has the ability to provide deep strikes on Russia's command and control, to impose costs on Russia and try to bring the war home to Russian territory. And the way it loses is it breaks consensus. And that could be, we might see some indications of that happening now, whether that's in the U.S. And the inability to pass Ukraine funding in our continuing resolution, the divides between the frontline states, Eastern and Western Europe. I think for Putin, the conditions are nowhere near justified for looking for a way out of this war. Even if the Ukrainians were performing better, if they were achieving more of their milestones with regards to the operational battlefield, and they are actually achieving a lot of those objectives at the strategic level, the way they're attacking the Black Sea Fleet, shifting the Black Sea Fleet from what they've felt comfortable doing, operating in garrison, forcing them to withdraw to more remote bases, Novorossiysk, whatever the case might be, going after strategic Russian targets, impacting Moscow itself, the capital. They're doing a lot of those things, but they're not able to achieve the successes that we all were hoping for on the front line. I think that those were overinflated estimates, and the bar was set too high for the Ukrainians. They might still achieve some fairly significant gains, but they're going to stretch out over more months into the winter. It's not going to wrap up in a nice, neat bow like it did last year with Kharkiv and Kherson in the late fall and early winter. I think this season's going to extend all the way through with some really not a significant decrease in hostilities. There might be some repositioning of forces because the Ukrainians took a lot of risks in the north and then the east, so they have to reposition the forces and secure those front lines. But in general, there's going to be a continuing fighting season. And the Russians, last year, when they were able to assemble 300,000 troops, were able to achieve really nothing, limited territorial gains. So we discussed the kind of tactical component, the military component, but the political component is where I'm particularly concerned. For Russia, its path to victory is exploiting fissures, driving wedges, and undermining support for Ukraine. Because if it believes it could do this successfully, then it could use its overwhelming, compared to Ukraine, its overwhelming economic size and manpower to slowly crush Ukraine. And they may have already achieved some of those successes. Certainly, the Vilnius NATO summit didn't go nearly far enough to warn off Russia. If anything, the indications were something closer to, as long as Russia engages in war in Ukraine, Ukraine remains outside of NATO. I think the prospects in their mind, for a favorable outcome in U.S. elections or other key elections around the democratic world is another path for victory to them, where they could achieve or be granted a victory by, let's say, the Republican establishment and somebody like Donald Trump or Ron DeSantis, the two front runners, that they couldn't achieve on the battlefield through the military. And at minimum, they're looking to see if they could hold on and make some gains over the course of 2024 and see what the election outcomes are. So I think there are numerous ways that Russia thinks it could hang on and potentially gain the upper hand. And the only real way that the Ukrainians can win decisively, destroying the Russian formation, there seems to be a lack of will for the West to provide those kinds of resources. A lot of it is because of what has been discussed here, the fears of escalation, the fears of Ukraine winning too much or Russia losing too badly, and the instability that breeds in Russia, potentially a fractured Russia with a more radical wing. These are, I think the experts in this room probably understand that there's probably not that much truth to the scenario. Russia can survive this war. It could actually withdraw and Putin can maintain power. But those fears are what drive policymakers. And they still think, certainly from the US context, and I get the impression from the European context, they still think about the Russia-Ukraine war in a regional context. And it's expanded way beyond the regional context from day one. That whether that was in the economic sphere and the fact that the entire world is paying Putin a war tax on oil and gas prices, or in regards to the instability that's being bred around the world, emboldening authoritarian regimes. We felt really quite comfortable in the first 6 months when Russia failed to achieve its objectives that this would be a brushback to authoritarian regimes and that this would be a warning to China, to Iran, to DPRK. 20 months in, I think they're feeling more comfortable, these regimes, and there's an opportunity for chaos. So I don't know what the outcomes of this war are. In certain regards, every day Russia gets weaker and Ukraine gets stronger, but that's only if Ukraine continues to enjoy Western support. And we haven't decided if we want to play to a stalemate and regional, or do we want to ensure that Ukraine wins? And that's a huge question.
Let me make another tactical remark and then follow up on the geopolitics. I'm thankful that you clearly said we would not fight like this in an offensive. I think that's important. I mean, if we want Ukraine to win, then we would have to resource Ukraine in a way how we would fight the fight ourselves. And not complain that they are not achieving results when we are not doing what we would do ourselves if we would have to fight the fight. And by the way, I mean, I trained with US forces and with other forces. If our brigades try to attack against heavily fortified positions in exercises, 8 or 9 times out of 10 times in exercise, we get it wrong. And then we have to do it over again. The Ukrainians do not have the luxury of getting it wrong and trying it again. But on the strategic level, just to have clarity on this, you said Vilnius was unsatisfactory. But it's the United States at the moment. Carefully, I mean, there's Rammstein happening today. There are United States and the White House being very, very careful not to put a NATO label on Ukraine support. Very keen on not opening an extension of invitation of Ukraine to NATO. For you, is NATO membership of Ukraine part of Ukrainian victory?
I think inevitably Ukraine will have to join NATO. I see there's a reasonable possibility this could actually happen within 5 years, because that's the only thing out of the context of the most acute phase of this war. That's the only thing that's going to actually provide some security and ensure that Russia doesn't look for another opportunity to attack Ukraine. If Ukraine's in NATO, we could put this issue to bed. If Ukraine's outside of NATO, I think Ukraine is vulnerable to Russian imperialism and revanchism. I do want to say something about, we tend to focus with regards to how we support Ukraine on weapon systems. We basically, the entire wish list that we were all probably talking about in the first days of the war, what the Ukrainians need, F-16s, long-range rocket systems, tanks, all those things are pretty much coming in. ATACMS, just a matter of time. I mean, as an aside, that the whole question of ATACMS, this is from the White House, is they think that they could hold them in reserve to try to warn off Russian attacks on Ukrainian critical infrastructure. We all know that's going to happen. So it's just a matter of time. If that's the calculus, it's just a matter of time. But there are other things that are in play. We don't tend to talk about helicopters. I think that has to be a critical component of this, especially within the envelope between the air power above and the air defense below. You could create envelopes for helicopters. And then training. Training is a huge gap. The kinds of training that the West has been providing has been basically small unit, almost kind of basic training, squad, platoon, some company level training, but staffs for combined arms, that has been a huge gap. And I think it looks like the British might be open to this because they're looking to position troops on the ground and start training, providing command and general staff training to be able to conduct these kinds of operations. One of the major failures of the Ukrainian armed forces is something as simple as adjacent unit coordination, talking to the units next to you, or relieving units. There are notorious stories of Bakhmut where a unit withdraws and is replaced 3 days later on lines that are occupied by the Russians. There are all sorts of these types of stories, or that logistics hasn't been planned out to sustain an attack, ammunition, fuel, whatever the case might be. These are important capabilities because of the turnover, some 100,000 potentially Ukrainian soldiers killed. That means that there is not a wealth of trained expertise in the military. So those are some major challenges that we need to overcome in the course of this next year.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you to all four of you. So I think we covered a vast array of issues already, and I have some questions, but I think I will not go into them between us now, but because I think we should open it up to questions, comments, maybe issues that you want to bring into this discussion, and then we will all have the chance to respond to that. I see the gentleman over there. Yes, please. Maybe you start. We will collect a few, and then there will be a chance to answer. Let's start. Do we have a microphone somewhere? Let's start over there, and then go to the other side.
In English or in Deutsch? English might be easier. Markus Welch, journalist. I just have a question to the first issue you brought up with, this is how I took you, optimism that with the right decisions we could build up industry, supply, Ukraine what they need. We were digging on data on the main key numbers of munition in the last weeks and try to put up everything what you can get on US analysts, Polish think tanks. I'm not so sure about this optimism because in March, the Ukraine Minister of Defense put up a number, what they need for classical artillery munitions. If you put this down to a more simple number, it's around 11,000 shots a day. This is the number, what they need to do the minimum of success, not about keeping the position, just to get a little bit ahead. We know all this debate, what gets between European Union and Ukraine this year, and it was a disaster by the production numbers, what they come up in the last month. So if you put everything together for the next year, not talking about this year, we didn't find more sources than to get up to maybe 8,000 or 10,000 shots a day. So everything is compensated by the US cluster munition right now or soon, and also for year 2024. So, and we were talking to US analysts, and they say, yes, you could put that more up, and you can fulfill the needs of Ukraine by the very production numbers, but we don't have probably the resources for that. So I want to ask, how do you see that? I mean, production numbers in factories are one thing, but the sources are the Rohstoffe, it's another thing. And this question to the US expert is, how do you see with this delivery chain of cluster munitions? As far as we understand, there's about between 4 and 5 million in the US. How far US would go to deliver that? But because if that is going down 2024, Ukraine will have a huge problem on the basic munitions.
Okay, yeah, thank you. Thank you for that. We will collect a few questions. I have seen some more hands. Yes, you over there.
My name is my name is Bernd Muckenschnabel. I'm not a politician. I'm not a journalist. I try to make it in German. Ich möchte an Sie die Frage stellen, wie Sie sich vorstellen können, dass Deutschland mehr tut für die Verteidigung und für den Freiheitskampf der Ukrainer mit einer Regierung und einer politischen Elite, wobei das Wort Elite bleibt mir im Halse stecken, die Deutschland faktisch in eine Situation geführt hat, dass wir zu 52% abhängig waren von Energielieferungen aus Russland, dass unsere Bundeswehr eine Lachnummer geworden ist und all dies nicht eine einzige Konsequenz hatte. Nicht ein einziger dieser Politiker, die dafür verantwortlich sind, ist zurückgetreten. Und wie wollen Sie das ändern? Ist es nicht notwendig, ist meine Frage an Sie und meine große Hoffnung an Sie, dass man eine Aufarbeitung der Geschichte, und zwar der jüngeren Geschichte, machen muss und herausfinden muss, wie kann es sein, dass Deutschland im Grunde zu einem Hindernis geworden ist für den Freiheitskampf der Ukrainer. Ich will bloß daran erinnern, dass die 16 Leopard-Tanks dann keine Munition hatten. Dann musste man fragen, die Munition holen aus der Schweiz. Die Schweiz hat dann wieder Nein gesagt. 16 Panzer hat fast ein Jahr gedauert. Jedes Mal, wenn Deutschland etwas liefert, kommt es zu spät an die Front. Und Deutschland hat im Grunde mit unserer Regierung eine Funktion übernommen, den Ukrainern in Ketten zu legen, damit sie sich nicht verteidigen können. Stellen Sie sich vor, wir sind alle jetzt erschüttert über Israel, was da passiert. Dass man Israel daran hindert, dass sie zurückschießen in das Land des Feindes, der sie angegriffen hat. Das ist das, was unsere Regierung jetzt macht. Wir dürfen keine Flugzeuge liefern, wir dürfen keine Raketensysteme liefern, um nicht Russland in große Schwierigkeiten zu bringen. Die deutsche Regierung sabotiert, das ist meine These, ich will ein bisschen Salz in die Diskussion, in die schöne Diskussion hier schmeißen, ja, sabotiert im Grunde den Freiheitskampf der Ukrainer und das ist nicht dienlich. Und wie will man diese Aufarbeitung der jüngsten Geschichte, das interessiert mich, da rangehen und das in die Hand zu nehmen, in den Griff zu kriegen. Sonst mit den Leuten, die Sie jetzt haben, die haben alle noch Dreck am Stecken. Ich empfehle ein Buch, Moskau Connection,
ja, also
von der FAZ, die kennen viele.
Den Kern der beiden Fragen nehmen wir auf. Vielen Dank dafür. Nehmen noch eine Frage hier vorne und dann machen wir erstmal eine Runde von Antworten und dann gehen wir nochmal in die Fragen.
Ja, Christoph Müller, mein Name aus Bonn. Ich möchte mich eigentlich an, I do it in English now again. I also want to continue with this, what the gentleman before me said. And I remember of the beginning of this second phase of the war, 2022, and when the Ukrainians had everywhere the panels and when they desperately asked for close the sky, which means NATO should intervene. And then this war might have had taken another outcome. And that's why my question, how can we achieve that, that those taboos, NATO, we must not be a Kriegspartei, party of the war. How can we get rid of these taboos in our minds and that there is a real success, and instead of going very, very slow steps and changing the minds of those unchangeable politician heads, and how can we really get rid of these taboos? So, because the danger is too big here, that there is a real big, Flächenbrand. That's what I want to say and ask you.
Well, thank you very much for the questions. Some of them were addressed, I think, specifically to Christian and to Alex, and everybody should come in wherever they want and what to pick. Christian, maybe you want to start?
Yeah, on the ammunition side, I guess that we basically, we both have to dig into the data, and the only thing I can give you as the kind of information is what industry tells me, and then basically go into the numbers. So it's a question of how do you count these things. But I understand if you take raw production numbers of what is produced worldwide by Western producers, then that's not the problem. You meant not resources, but raw materials. It's also something where I asked them the same question. I said, sure, here and there we have some problems, but with regard to the fact that we are not only producing it at one place, but all over the world, we basically have the capacity to shift around. The bigger question of resources is this: are we willing to pay for it? Are we willing to pay for the economic price and that we have to pay on this? Because, of course, prices always go up in such a situation, or not? I think that's the main, from my perspective, that's the main problem that we currently have. Because raw materials, once things become more expensive, then suddenly some raw materials that are just lying around, which have never been digged in because it was economically not feasible, become attractive. That's the whole story about the so-called discovery in Sweden. That was discovered years ago. We knew about it, and we knew that there is an opportunity to make it useful, but it was not. We couldn't pay for it, right? So, but for the rest, I think we basically have to. If you allow me, I'm happy to take a look into your data, and then we can possibly find ways of solutions to that. On the NATO, and that's how I would read it, because that would be the consequence. NATO entering the war as a war party, that would open up the hell, because then all the kind of the principal no to a nuclear escalation would come on the table immediately, and that's something where, for very good reasons, because I don't buy into the whole escalation fear of some people in one or the other part of the government, but this is something. I would say no, that's definitely a red line, and it's not necessary. If we just supply a sufficient amount of conventional capabilities, that's not the problem. Once we open up the opportunity of a nuclear escalation, we change the calculus of the situation. For now, it's pretty clear the only one who can escalate by nuclear weapons is the Russians. If we change the calculus on the Russian side, that's something I would agree on that could possibly go out of hands. And for the history part, I'm not sure it's, all the ideas of, so what do you want to have? This is still a democracy. So these people have been elected, not sure that whoever you want to have in the government being put there by whatever kind of mechanism is more clever than this. I don't see many people who basically have the DNA in this country to run a country in a war situation, even if we are not the war party. It's just 30 years of people having socialized in an environment that was basically framed by there will be no other war in Europe anywhere, so you don't have to worry. Just be against the war, everything will be fine. This is something that you can't get out of the head of the people. It's even difficult for me, being a German socialized, Western German socialized in this country.
Yeah, and maybe just briefly, 2 cents from me. I'm not part of the German government, but on the question of coming to terms with the past, I think a book like the Moscow Connection can only be the beginning. And yes, I'm absolutely convinced we should look into who took money from the Russians, who was working for the Russians, who was influencing debate. It did the debates on behalf of the Russians. I think it's necessary also to come to a different Russia policy of the future to do all this. But let's be honest to ourselves. There was no large protest from the German public against policies like this. There was a large romantic relationship of the German public to Russia. So it's not that somebody did something against the will of the Germans. That is not my impression. And it was sometimes very difficult to have an argument even in the society about what Putin really is and what Russia is coming into. So it's more than just individual people and individual politicians. I think it's a societal phenomenon we are dealing with here. Alex, there was a question directly to you, and then Maryna and Justyna, if you want to come in.
Sure. So, with regards to ammunition or military support, I could tell you from the senior-most elements of the White House that they believe that we've hit the high water mark on military support, that there is not that much more in terms of what's available to shift over to Ukraine, and they're kind of casting around for solutions. They will say that we've significantly depleted our ammunition stores and everything else we need to save for our own contingencies, you know, on a scenario that we have to fight the Russians directly or a confrontation in the Middle East or the Pacific. I think the industrial base is probably adequate around the globe from the democracies to ramp up, to shift to something closer to war footing if the resources are put in, but they'll also say that it's going to take time to get there. And I don't think our, within the U.S. at least, the military bureaucracy is being particularly thoughtful, saying that we need to preserve these stores of ammunition in case we need to fight. In fact, we are not in this fight directly, but we are supporting a party in war, and that party is neutralizing one of our most significant inveterate adversaries, Russia, and taking a little bit of risk with regards to our own war plans by providing support to Ukraine makes a huge amount of sense. But that's just not the way the bureaucracy thinks. The bureaucracy thinks it needs X number of weapons to conduct a contingency plan to defend NATO, and they're pretty rigid about making sure that those resources are in place. So unless there is a plan for industry to backfill whatever is being provided, the answer from the Department of Defense is we can't provide it. It's going to be a huge challenge going into 2024. That is the driving force why we provided cluster munitions, because we just didn't have standard 155 high explosive rounds. I think we will probably, that's another reason why we might, even though we have a limited store of ATACMS, we might go in that direction also. If it looks like we need to plug some holes, but there are efforts underway to fix this problem, but there are no solutions at the moment. With regards to nuclear escalation, I think we did not need to apply NATO troops or NATO resources directly. But I'm concerned that we might get to that point where NATO is going to have no choice because of a black swan event, whether it's a nuclear accident, a Russian use of WMDs or something of that nature, where we have no choice, or casualties from just basic, simple conventional munitions, where NATO has to do a little some sort of no-fly zone buffer to protect NATO citizenry. So I'm a little bit concerned that we're, our rigid thinking about not providing, that this was some sort of impossible threshold is unrealistic. We might get there anyway. We also need to recognize that Russia doesn't miss the fact that challenging NATO, where NATO chooses to make a decision, especially if it's to protect its own interests, is a extremely high bar for them, because they know they have no conventional capability to spare. They're not saving a special reserve of ammunition or weapons to fight NATO. That means automatically, if they take a posture against NATO, that is a quick, rapid spiral towards nuclear. So if we do something to protect NATO interests, like a buffer zone, like a no-fly zone in response to a casualty-producing event or a nuclear accident or use of WMDs, that doesn't mean that I don't think that means that we are locked into a spiral for nuclear war, because again, mutually assured destruction is ironclad. The last thing I'll mention and I'll talk in the U.S. context, but I think some of this will resonate in the German context. So my doctoral dissertation was on U.S. policy towards Russia and Ukraine since 1991, and there were some key features, I guess, of that relationship. One, I think the West in general bought into Russian exceptionalism and invested the preponderance of our resources into to shepherding a relationship with Russia at the cost of every other nation in the region. I think a place like France in particular thought about Eastern Europe as flyover country. The principal relations were with Moscow and figuring out how to navigate Moscow. Germany maybe to a certain extent too, maybe not quite as bad, but there was a high degree of exceptionalism. There was also a couple of other interesting features. There was a strong desire to reap some of that peace dividend after 1991, and a lot of aspirations on what could be accomplished with Russia beyond what was clearly in the Russians' own interests. So an unrealistic policy on what could be accomplished with Russia, and then deep-seated fears about as we learned more and more about who Vladimir Putin was, that he was more in the role of Soviet leadership, that we would be spiraling into another Cold War. And these were arresting features to taking good steps towards Ukraine, especially after the Orange Revolution, or challenging Russia, whether it was initially introducing some conditionality on how we engaged with them, or countering their aggression, because we thought that we would be the factor that would drive that relationship into a downward spiral. So I think some of that explains why our Western leadership, and then I think there was also a dearth of experience in leadership and engaging with Russia. I think we shifted off very, very drastically away from understanding, key regional challenges. The U.S. in particular was focused on the Middle East, and we don't have the experienced leadership to manage this crisis right now. I think that's certainly the case in the U.S. It's probably the case around the world. We don't have folks that are they're good in a normal peacetime scenario, but are not necessarily best equipped to deal with the challenges of a major war.
Thank you. Maryna?
Yes, thank you. I just want to share some reflections on the remarks that two gentlemen said. So I think what we've seen, one of the problems is that decision makers have been operating in a very self-determined mode. Basically, when we've seen Russia, climbing this escalation ladder very fastly, we couldn't catch up with them, because of the fear escalation that we mentioned. And I think this self-deterrence, it was not helpful, is not helpful here, trying to deal with the Russian aggression. Because when we talk or we openly advertise our own red lines, what do? Do we mitigate, the escalation risks as we, I think, naively hope? No. I think this is naivete to think that if we would write the op-ed and we would say there would be no American soldiers in Ukraine, we would not, or we would not encourage Ukrainians to hit Russian territory or whatever. So when we openly talk about what we won't do in Ukraine, what our limits of engagement are. Of course, there are limits of engagement, but why? This is a basic principle of deterrence. Yeah, it needs to be credible. We don't need to be talking about our own red lines, which we created. We created a lot of red lines, which we've seen, we destroyed them. We were in our own weapons supply, but why are we talking about them, to our adversary? This has been, I would say, a very serious mistake that we made. And then I think one second problem is that there is still a hope that we can go back, to the situation when Russia could be dealt with or reasoned with. And this is not the case any longer. And I think we need to brace the reality that we are in a completely different situation now. And there is no going back, and we are to face this situation for the years to come. There will be more insecurity, and we cannot do, I mean, we can do a lot by helping Ukraine, but we cannot change Russia's stance any longer. Its strategic, objectives are not changed, and we at the moment, the only way we can, we can curtail those strategic objectives, which is basically to annihilate Ukraine and to, and to harm us, is by helping Ukraine. And then the last thing, which still puzzles me, I mean, when we, 20 years again into this war, and I mean, the war is since 2014, seems, I mean, the lessons learned, right? So I think there should be enough of, material or food for thought to know Russian strategic thinking better, even for the ones who never dealt with Russia before, So back in my youth at the Ukrainian university, we were studying old Soviet, textbooks and memoirs, about, what was the recommendation, how to deal with the hostile powers, that you need to, to overwhelm the adversary immediately by raising the stakes, by blackmailing the ultimatums, and then when you have, an adversary in the disarray, then you are prepared, to talk. And this is exactly what we are seeing at the moment, the language of ultimatums, the language of blackmails. So what puzzles me is still, this is perceived by somebody as novelty, as something that we were not prepared for, even though the decades of Russia acting, and we didn't care to listen to what President Putin said decades ago. So when he said that, at Munich, it was clear. We were just trying to rationalize. We were just trying to think that, okay, this is the way probably that Russians talk, that this is an exaggeration. But it was not. And I think that now we just need to understand, right, and to care to listen to and understand that they mean what they say. Russian-American journalist Masha Gessen, she wrote a book, and where one sentence about how to survive in the autocracies. And she said, believe to the autocrats, believe what they say. So if they say that they are going to destroy you, that you are their adversary, just believe and be prepared. And it looks like what we were not doing. Thank you.
Yeah. From my side, one short point. I will join you with being puzzled why Western Europe still don't understand what it is all about, what is the Russian strategy, what are the Russian goals. And, even people in Poland and the Polish ministries ask me questions, what is the German strategy? And I try to explain. People are simply puzzled why Germany, after Zeitenwende, still German decision makers still do not understand how to develop policy strategy in this war and vis-a-vis Russia. I would like to make one point or react to how can we influence the debate in Germany. I think that from my Polish perspective, the means to influence the debate in Germany are limited. Because I tried to do so in the first year of your war, where I saw that the window of opportunity for external voices are there to take part and to influence a bit the German debate. I think this window of opportunity is closed, not only because of the government we have been having, and that was, diplomatically saying, has a skeptical rhetoric towards Germany that is not well received here, that we have also electoral campaign ongoing. But I think that the German chancellor or the chancellery, the government, has won the upper hand with regard to the narrative. And the fact that Germany indeed supports Ukraine to a large extent, this is a fact. But Germany is not doing enough for Ukraine to win, for European security to be guaranteed for a longer time. And this is, for me, this is something that will have negative consequences for our future, for the security of Europe, and that will be so tragic. But right now, as we hear the German officials saying, Germany is the second largest supplier of weapons. But still, no one saying what the German, is the German strategy towards the Ukrainian war. So this is a difficult situation to influence from external or from third countries the German internal debate. And I think only internally German can influence, or the German experts, German public can influence the German decision makers. And I think, first of all, Russia, which will make facts on the ground, will affect German policy and German decision makers. These are the main factor that I see. And then the second one, internal debates and internal discussions in Germany.
Keep the microphone. I will ask you one more question. But before that, I would say, that's also true for the Ukrainians. I think the Ukrainians have understood quite well that it's not the political debates here in Germany or elsewhere shaping the reality. It's the military reality on the battlefield that is shaping the debates in Germany. Our debates have changed because Ukrainians created a military reality. That is, and we did things that were excluded from the highest political levels. We later did them because the Ukrainians found a way to convince us by creating a military reality on the ground. So that's also, I think, very important. I was signaled to wrap this up. We will keep the Ordnung and Disziplin with the time schedule here. I know there have been more questions. We will have to address them informally. But I will ask each of you a short question with a one-sentence answer. Because I want to know for victory of Ukraine, what is the most important next step? And Justyna, you will go first.
You know, for me, it's not a step. It's the change of minds. The change of minds of European decision makers. This is the most important thing that I see.
Christian? Next step for victory of Ukraine?
Don't give up on the German government. We can manage possibly the society, but I guess now is from my point of view, the strategy is more we again need the help of our friends, because for the internal domestic debate, the experts have lost influence on the chancellorship simply because we are seen as political enemies and no longer as people who are observers and giving advice.
Thank you. Alex, what's the next step?
I think internal Ukrainian support is ironclad. It's not going on anywhere. They're not going to give up. So it's external support, maintaining that external support. From the U.S. side, there actually may be some hope, especially with events in Israel, tragic events in Israel the past couple of days, that there will be a very, very large appropriation to cover the entirety of 2024. If that's the case, there are numbers like $100 billion that might be allocated. That will be a lot of resource.
For all of it?
Yes. That will be a lot of resource to apply to help arm Ukraine to deliver those decisive victories on the battlefield.
Thank you. Maryna.
Continue to support Ukraine politically, start the accession talks with the EU, and then continue to support Ukraine militarily, and Ukrainians will do the rest.
Yeah, and they are already doing that, and that will be my next step. Ukraine has been very successful when it comes to the western part of Crimea, and I think the next step to Ukrainian victory is more success on Crimea for Ukraine. I think that's the center of gravity, and maybe we are even closer to that than we think. Thank you for your attention. It was a privilege for me to moderate this, and please give a hand of applause to our four distinguished speakers.
Thank you very much for that great panel. We will now have two parallel forums. The first one on accountability for war crimes, international rule-based order on test. Where will it take place? Where will it take place? This 1A. Please. Du musst sagen, wo die Leute hin müssen.
We need to know who wants to go to the panel on accountability of war crimes. Can you please raise your hands? Depending on this, we'll decide, because one room is smaller, okay? And it's 1A. And 1B is on energy security. Who wants to go to energy security? Okay, so then energy security stays here and accountability goes upstairs.
But go up to the first floor?
First floor, you will see the indicators to the room, but we have half an hour break first.
And please postpone the coffee break after the panels.